one of the things about Noble Rot is, yeah, we want to talk about wine and food in a really informed, in-depth way, but we also want it to have a sense of humour and it to represent a fun escape.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Eliza Barbanel. Dan Keeling is the co-founder and editor of Noble Rot magazine, a restaurateur behind the Noble Rot restaurant group in London, and the co-founder of Keeling Andrew Wine Imports. He's also the author of a great new book about wine, Who's Afraid of Romane Conti, a shortcut to drinking great wine. I spoke with Dan about his singular point of view on wine, his past life as a head of A&R at Parlophone Records, and how to go about finding a great glass at the bar. Dan Keeling, this is Taste. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So it's the end of your work day. Are you going to be opening a bottle of wine in your near future?
Well, it's one of those rare days where I don't. I've got a busy schedule this week, so it's good to have a couple of days clear of wine. Also, the doctor says so. Yeah, not tonight.
Yeah, I feel like for folks who are in the beverage space in general, but certainly wine, it must be interesting to kind of navigate that. Do you find that a lot of people have certain days that they observe where they don't drink wine or some kind of way of trying to mediate their habits, or not really?
Well, I think this generation does, whereas I think maybe past generations didn't do so much. I remember speaking to Stephen Spurrier, who was a real kind of one of the inspirations for us, in fact, in the wine industry, and he was quite an class guy. And I said to him, how much do you drink a day, honestly? And he said for the last 50 years he hadn't drunk less than a liter of wine a day, and he
Whoa.
didn't have any days off at all. So that's some stamina. But I don't know. I think working in wine and restaurants, then if you can do a couple of days off, then I think it's good for your brain, definitely.
Yeah, I guess that's one way to keep from getting a hangover is to just keep drinking every day.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned you have a busy week. I imagine that might be because your book is about to come out. And I was wondering if you could tell me, like, what's behind the title, Who's Afraid of Romane Conti, a shortcut to drinking great wine? So why Romani Conti? Why is that what you call the pinnacle of what wine can achieve?
Well, yeah, I mean, I could have called it "Who's Afraid of Fine Wine," but I didn't think it had that much of a good ring to it. So, Romani Conti for me represents, the pinnacle of wine. It's the most favoured wine in the world. And so actually the actual words as well, Romani Conti, they roll very nicely. I'm a big Burgundy fan. It's kind of the top domain in Burgundy is Domaine de la Romani Conti. So that became the title, and by kind of, I don't know what it was, something in the universe happened. But there's that book, The Secret, came out like probably around the millennium. That
Hmm.
the power of wishful thinking. Once I came up with the title, I found that I got invited to this amazing tasting at the Domain just through kind of mutual contacts, and it was 25 vintages of Romani Conti, which was just an incredible thing to be able to go and drink and taste. I never thought I would get access to it in that way. I'd tasted it before, but maybe a thimble's worth at a tasting. But to actually drink a wine, it kind of brings it alive so much more. You get so much more experience from doing that. So, a couple of years ago, I went to this tasting, which kind of makes up one of the chapters in the book. The book kind of ranges from starting off as completely ignorant about wine, and then finding out about it through, that kind of cliche of a gateway wine, and then ending up at this crazy tasting of Romani Conti, and then trying to work out where everything else that I'd tasted over the kind of 15 years in between kind of fitted in. So it's got lots of kind of niche and interesting wines from around Europe.
Yeah, it's a really special book. I found myself being really drawn to just your writing and the description of a lot of the wine. But I love what you just said about this tasting that you got to go to. And I'm curious, as a wine writer and editor, when you get to experience like 25 different vintages of an amazing wine, do you have a notebook that you're keeping notes in, or do you kind of try to jot it down afterwards? Like, how do you kind of navigate so much input?
Yeah, I was trying to jot it down, the experience at the time, but it was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. It was like when I first drove a car on my own. I had to drive a car from Fulham in London to one of my relatives' house in Kilburn. One of my first days in work at A&M Records, and it was at rush hour. And I nearly crashed so many times, and a 20-minute journey turned into 3 hours. And likewise, this was another experience where, because I kind of knew that it was a once in a lifetime experience, that I had to really kind of focus. And also, there's that thing of imposter syndrome. This is supposed to be the world's most fabled and incredible wine, and can I do it justice as a taster? And it started off at 9 o'clock in the morning in the Prince de Conti's old couverie in Von Romane in Burgundy. And there was eight of us in total, three people from the domain. And it was the most nerve-wracking kind of first 40 minutes when there was seven Romani Contis in front of me. And because it's the way it's made with stems included, so it's not destem, so it has kind of it's quite an undergrowthy flavour to it, or aroma rather. It didn't have the kind of usual kind of fruit characteristics that you would get, but you would spot in like young Pinot Noir. So it took a while to really acclimatise to the wine.
I love this idea of being nervous and also starting at 9 a.m. Is that a typical hour to be drinking so much wine?
Oh, well, you're not drinking at that time.
Yeah.
You're spitting. So, by the end of the tasting, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was a lot of wine left on the table. And at that point, you're thinking, can you really leave that kind of wine in a glass undrunk? So some of it got hoovered up at that point.
That's very reasonable. I want to talk to you about the collection of book quotes that you have, because you have like Keira Knightley and Mike D of the Beastie Boys talking about how this is the best wine book. How did that come about?
So Mike was in issue one of Noble Rock magazine, and one of my friends who was a music agent knew his manager, and I got in touch with him through that, and he came on board and did a Q&A back in 2013. And then he came to the UK and I interviewed him and we became friends. And so I see Mike a lot. He's a big wine lover. I grew up listening to the Beastie Boys, as a 17-year-old kid in Buckinghamshire in England. Check Your Head was one of my favorite ever albums. So quite surreal to become friends with Mike, but he's a very down to earth guy, as is Kira. And Kira, how did we meet Kira? I met Kira through friends again, and James, her husband, was in a band called the Claxons, and I tried to sign them to Island Records back in 2006 or seven, unsuccessfully. But we knew each other, and I saw him a few years later through another interviewee in the magazine, which was James Murphy from LCD Sound System.
I love all of these connections to, wine and art and music. And you mentioned a little bit about how you have a past as a record label A&R guy. I'm curious if you think there's any like skills or like POV from that you think have transferred over well to your current stint in the hospitality wine media world.
Yeah, well, coming up through A&R, one thing it does teach you is tenacity. And I remember, my first ever boss at A&M Records describing what needs to happen, in the job. And he said, you need to know about every band in Britain. And as soon as you hear about a band, find out the number of the manager, call him up, ask him for the cassette. It was cassettes at that point in 97, I guess. And if 2 days later, if it hasn't arrived, call them again. And then 2 days later, if it hasn't arrived, call them and call them until they say either leave me alone or you get the demo. And that kind of tenacity is something that, I've applied to certain parts of the job with the magazine, because, a magazine is something that it feels like you have to hustle together every issue. You have to prod a lot of contributors, come up with ideas, there's the artwork. Also, with our wine import business, that kind of A&R attitude of getting out and trying to find who the next hot winemaker is going to be, and also the existing ones that you really love, and seeing if you can work with them in some way. That comes from A&R. In terms of the kind of hospitality side of the business, I remember in 2006, this company called Terra Firma took over EMI. They were like a private hedge fund company, and they had a history of what they called saving companies. Odeon Cinemas, whose employees they said thought they were in the film business when in fact they're in the popcorn business. And I say to our staff, yeah, we're definitely in the wine, food, and hospitality business. But what really sets us apart is we're in the storytelling business. And that's whether they're talking to their colleagues in briefings before every service and interactions with customers. You know, it's the real reason for Noble Rot is to provide value for our customers and our readers, because you know we care about the people that are coming in and wanting to have a good time with us, and we believe that there's some real value in the information and the stories that we're sharing about these incredible winemakers and foods and dishes. So that's another side of it that definitely comes from my music background.
Yeah, I love all of those threads connecting. And I think, especially what you're saying about storytelling in the restaurants and the wine bars, that really does kind of, I imagine, come from the fact that you've had this magazine, Noble Rot, for so long. Has it been 10 years now?
Over 10 years, yeah. And it's incredibly competitive restaurants, and you know, it's such a great thing to have this, you know, every issue 23 stories, all these different contributors who really care about food and wine and popular culture. You know, in the new issue we've got Ridley Scott, who came in and did an amazingly interesting interview, and we typically do it over a couple of bottles of wine, and it's quite relaxed, so you can get maybe to places that they don't normally go, interviewees, you know, when it's a bit too kind of formal.
Hmm. I actually have been really excited to talk to you because, in addition to Taste, I run a indie literary food magazine. It's a dessert-based magazine, and we often fantasize about opening like a dessert wine bar that's connected to the magazine in some ways. So I think that the fact that you do that is so cool, and I'm just interested in what inspired that idea. I'm sure it's, fun over a glass of wine to say we should open a restaurant or several restaurants, but when did you decide that it was actually time to do that?
Well, it became apparent quite quickly that to do an independent magazine or fanzine was just not going to earn us any money. There was
Yeah.
two of us, you know, we had families, mortgages, you know, cats, pets. You gotta earn some money, and magazines are not a way to do it. Nor were restaurants particularly, but we thought it was a good idea at the time, and we were passionate about restaurants, obviously. So you know, we thought about, do we open a shop? Do we do the restaurant? We have got a couple of shops now, but restaurants are very exciting. You know, there's a lot of instant kind of feedback from customers when you recommend a wine, for example. They can tell you straight away whether they like it or not. You know, it's just such a special place, a restaurant. You know, you could be in there on a busy service, and you know, sometimes you just get this moment of clarity when, you know, everything goes quiet, save for a few people laughing, and you realize that people are escaping from their everyday life and just kind of having those special moments. And when, you know, people say that they come and they have anniversaries or birthdays at Noble Rot, or, you know, it's where they propose to their husband or wife, it's creating this magical kind of community of people that, you know, if they keep coming, it's just such a kind of satisfying thing.
Yeah, I imagine also, making magazines is a really social process, and then you put it out into the world and you don't really get to see people reading it in the same way that you get to watch people drinking a glass of wine, that kind of immediate feedback.
Yeah, you don't. You see them on Instagram. I mean, I always picture the magazine sitting by people's toilets, and that's kind of where I always really wanted it to be. And it's I want it to be that thing that people see in their house somewhere, and it remind them of being in the restaurant. And you know, one of the things about Noble Rot is, yeah, we want to talk about wine and food in a really informed, in-depth way, but we also want it to have a sense of humor and it to represent a fun escape. So like you're sitting in a restaurant with your friends having that fun escape from the world, you can kind of pick up an issue and dive into it and be whisked away to these other places. Everything from the artwork to how it's quite kind of poppy and playful, to the kind of people that write for the magazine, and they all have a sense of humor. It's really important. The overall feel of Noble Rot.
Something I really enjoyed when reading the book is how you were able to talk about Noble Rot, the restaurant group, as like a way that you put your perspective on wine into practice. Like for example, you were talking about how there are certain rules for a house wine that you would put on the menu at Noble Rot. So, what makes something a good house wine for the restaurant group?
Well, all our wines, they've got to taste like what they are. It's be something that we happily drink ourselves with friends. And if it's a house wine, it's got to cost as little as possible. So that's a big challenge. Quite easy to find old vintages of Mouton Rothschild for a fairly decent price, but it's the cheap wines which are the holy grail. But when I say it tastes like what it is, that probably sounds a bit simplistic. But if it's a Vina Verde, it should taste like a Vina Verde, and if it's a Chablis, it should have those kind of classic hallmarks of a Chablis. So that's important to us. You know, we're into characterful, distinctive wines. We're not into homogenized wines. So that's mega important for us. Obviously, you've got to have something that's not prone to a lot of faults, which, sometimes with wines, there are wines that are typically a bit more faulty from some producers, and that wouldn't do for a house wine. If it's a white wine, it's got to be crisp, clean, refreshing, got to have good texture and persistence. And if it's a house red, it's got to be, have supple tannins. It can't be too drying. It's got to have pure fruit, nothing too challenging, nothing too alcoholic, too sweet. It's this kind of middle ground. You've got to please a lot of people with a house wine. And they're not easy to find.
Yeah, it's a Goldilocks moment, I would imagine, when you find a good one. Do you try to keep things on the menu for a while, or is it kind of more in your favor to be rotating in and introducing people to new things?
I mean, our lists change all the time. So from one day to the next, you'll come in and there'll be different wines on there. The house wines will typically stay, we'll keep them for months, years. There's no reason to change them as long as we've got a good supplier that is hitting all those kind of, the price point and the quality levels, then consistency is good. But, we pride ourselves on, finding, the interesting new producers in lots of different areas. The most amount of wine on our list comes from France, but then we've got a lot of Italian wines, we've got a lot of Spanish, we've got Greek wine's a big thing with us. My business partner is a master wine who did his thesis in Santorini at Certico, so he's a big Grecophile. It's a diverse list. We have got New World wines on there, Californian wines, Australian wines as well, but we kind of specialize a bit more in the old world, for want of a better term, and we go deep on old vintages as well. So, for example, Bordeaux is now so out of fashion that you can actually pick up some really great value with a lot of bottle age for not that much money. So we sell a lot of that in our Mayfair restaurant, and maybe in Soho it's a bit more kind of Jura and there's more natural wine gets sold. So it's interesting the different areas of London that we're in.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting part of it as well. Do you order for all of them and then kind of decide which one needs more of one kind of wine?
We kind of, there's different nuances on each list. Like, Mayfair is, there's people who come to our Mayfair restaurant who don't leave Mayfair unless they're going to the south of France for their yacht. So it's a slightly different demographic to our Lamb's Conduit Street restaurant. So it is a bit more nuanced in different ways in the different restaurants. But overall, you can go and you can drink from this kind of key areas that Noble Rot love, and who we write, where we've written about in the magazine and in the previous book as well.
In your book, you talk about the importance of pairing food and wine through a really great example, which is Vin jaune and Comté cheese. I'm going to read this if you don't mind, because I think it's really beautiful writing. Paired with judiciously aged local Comté, Vin jaune is arguably half of the most delicious symbiotic combination known to man. That such a confluence between grape, yeast, dairy, and our capacity for ecstasy exists is almost an argument for intelligent design. Perhaps there is really something out there that loves us and wants us to be happy. Or maybe we just lucked out. So, how did you come across this example and how do you approach pairing in the Noble Rot restaurants?
In the restaurants, with our set lunch, we'll always have wines paired to it. And I think that there's some pretty basic rules that you can stick to so things don't clash too much. You think about the texture of a dish or whether it has a sauce, those kind of things. Of course, whether it's fish, meat, or vegetables. With food and wine matching, I think it can get taken a bit too far because I think there's some completely magical matches. And one of those is Van Joan with Comté cheese or Van Jome with Vacheron cheese as well, which are both from the area. But they're few and far between. But when you do have those kind of synergies between food and wine, I think that they can just elevate both to another level. So, for example, we were in Puglia this summer and we went to this incredible restaurant and we had sea urchin linguine with a Pinot Meunier champagne. And the kind of champagne, it mirrored the smell, the aroma of the sea urchin, and vice versa. It was just an incredible match. Likewise, truffle with aged Barolo or grouse with an old Burgundy. They can have incredible synergy between the kind of smells. They overlap. They kind of egg each other on in some weird way. So I think there's these magical matches, and then there's just these kind of general kind of, Chardonnay with, roast chicken or whatever, which are all fine, but I don't know if they're kind of improving each other that much.
Yeah, and with this Van Joan Comté example, what about those two flavor profiles are interacting well together?
Yeah, so Van Joan is a little bit like an unfortified sherry. It's not the same grape, but it has that kind of smell, that kind of flavor profile. Has an incredibly large array of different flavors that come out of a Van Joan barrel. It could be, these kind of spicy curry leaves. I've had like old Van Joans from the 60s that taste of ripe Indian mangoes that have been salted, or
Mm.
fenugreek is another flavor profile, but it's indescribable. It's very savory. The wine has been aged under a floor of yeast for 6.5 years, a minimum of 6.5 years in a barrel. So when a wine gets put in a barrel normally for that length of time, it evaporates down and it will get ruined. It will get turned to vinegar because the oxygen will do that, but the yeast protects it and it gives it this crazy array of different flavors. Very umami as well. Curry leaf, go back to that. I just, the first time I ever had it, it really made me laugh because I never thought a wine would taste like that.
Mm.
And when you put it with something that's as umami as, a bit of aged Comté, it's just a brilliant kind of synergy that, there's that old cliche of what grows together goes together. And maybe it's because they're made in the same region with the same microbes or something. Maybe that's the kind of secret of it.
Yeah, I think that was definitely my takeaway from reading that section that, obviously we talk about terroir a lot with wine, but that cheese or other kind of foods from a region would have something similar going on there, maybe even on like a microbial deeper level.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious for you what it was like to be writing a book after publishing a magazine for so long. Was it exciting to be in a different format? And did you have a different approach when you're going about writing the book?
No, not really. I don't necessarily always focus on outcomes of things as I'm doing something. I'll just do a little bit and often. And with the magazine, and with writing, I just find that I try and do a little bit every day. I think that's how you become better at writing, or how you become better at cooking, or anything in life, is just by constantly doing it. So I'm not always thinking, oh, I've got a magazine to put out in 3 months' time or a book to deliver. It's just get a bit done, and I love the process. Kind of always a little bit disappointed when it's finished and it's trying to work out what to do next.
I love to hear that from a writer that enjoys the process. I think sometimes people are not actually as in love with the act of writing itself.
No, I mean, I understand it when people say they hate writing because what they mean is they just can't get the words out that they want. But I've listened to people explain what their book is about and then not really sounding like they had a good time writing it, and that puts me right off.
Yeah. Do you listen to music when you're writing?
Not particularly, but sometimes if I'm in the mood, then put something quite strong or motive on, just to get going. But no, I kind of like. I don't know if I like silence. I used to be a bit more particular and needed silence, but I can write pretty much anywhere now. I can write on the tube. Can obviously it doesn't need to be packed on the tube, but just if you can grab 20 minutes here and there, it's that old thing of, your first draft of anything is normally pretty crap, so you just rewriting. Writing is rewriting all the time, so just getting into that headspace that sometimes is better than others.
Yeah, I imagine when someone is as busy as yourself, also that it's just more important to be finding the 20 minutes than dimming the lights and putting a record on and really getting in a certain headspace.
Yeah, well, it just takes so much time, so you got to grab all the time you can.
I'm interested in if you would think of the business as being equally split between the restaurants and the magazine, or if you think one is kind of where more of the focus is these days. I know that the magazine came first, but on the Noble Rot website, the restaurants are actually listed first.
Yeah, the magazine I look at as our kind of ethos, our mouthpiece, the thing that kind of ties together the whole of the restaurants and our import business and our shops. It kind of tells people why what's special about wine and why should they care. So every 4 months when it comes out, I think it's a really useful thing for us, but it's not the driver of our business in terms of the business side. The business is three restaurants, the wine import business, and the shops. That takes more money than a magazine. A magazine in 2024 is, especially one without any advertising, is not a money making enterprise on its own. So it's just I think about it in a completely different way. I think it's really important for us. I wouldn't be very well. I wouldn't like to have three restaurants and not have a mouthpiece like we've got with the magazine. Put it that way.
I'm curious about your perspective on the wine world and maybe the natural wine world specifically. It's obviously changed so much over the past decade that Noble Rot has been publishing, the past decade plus that you've been publishing. Like, how do you see the industry evolving compared to 10 years ago? And do you think the magazine's place in that has shifted as well?
I think the discussion about natural wine has moved on a little bit. I think I'm in awe of the best natural winemakers because they take so many risks. They haven't got these other additives and processes that more conventional winemakers use, so they've got to be meticulously clean. They've got to, sort their fruit even more meticulously as well, than other people who are kind of, adding things to their wines and filtering and more industrially made wine, which is the complete antithesis of natural.
Hmm.
So I think there's less tolerance for badly made natural wine now. And I think that maybe some of the more hardcore voices in natural wine are a little bit more tolerant of a tiny bit of sulfur if it kind of helps protect a wine. So I think we're in a much better place than we were a few years ago. I think there's a bit more tolerance. I mean, we're into like traditionally made wine, typically long aged. But we want to have wines that are organic, biodynamic, not sprayed with lots of chemicals. So it's a quite a nuanced discussion, but I think it's one that is kind of grown up a little bit.
Yeah, I noticed that even a little bit in some of the language that you have in the book. Like, it seems that you prefer the term living wines as opposed to natural. What does that preference come down to?
With living wines, I just kind of wanted to come up with a term which would describe these artisanally made wines that haven't got loads of additives, that aren't kind of fined and filtered and use commercial yeasts, and that are just homogenized. And there's a lot of processes that wine can go through so it can become a consistent product that can be sent around the world. And a living wine, typically a lot of the wines that we sell, they have, not that much kind of, well, the fewer kind of processes a wine goes through, in many ways the better. So living wines, I think they're capable of these incredible highs, but also they can be quite moody as well, and they might not be 100% consistent, but I would rather have something that can really, really amaze you than something that's consistent and a bit boring. It's a bit like being on prescription drugs, I guess. It's just that every day is the same thing. That's not why we're in wine. And sometimes we will open a bottle of wine and be, very disappointed by something that's from a great vineyard or a great producer. But that's kind of all part of it. And a living wine is something that is kind of evolving over many years. And some years it can shut down. And if you open it at that point, it will be that disappointment. But a few years on, it can suddenly appear and blossom into this incredible thing. So that's what I was kind of getting at with living wines.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice term. And I would imagine there might be some people listening right now, hopefully they're still with us, who are interested in learning more about living wine. Maybe it's not an area that they know much about. And besides reading Who's Afraid of Romani Conti, how would you suggest people kind of get immersed in that more?
Well, buy Noble Rock magazine. Um, Come to our restaurants. I mean, in America, there's plenty of other great restaurants in New York and LA that are kind of, cross over with the kind of producers that we like to drink. And, when I go to France, I'll always see American sommeliers and journalists. And, of course, we have American journalists writing for us too.
To close today, I want to play a little rapid fire taste check game with you. So I'll give you a question and I'm going to make you play favorites. So apologies in advance. You can let me know the first answer that comes into your head, or maybe a couple if it's quick.
Okay.
Okay. Your favorite wine growing region right now?
Burgundy.
Your favorite city for drinking wine?
Bone in Burgundy.
Your favorite London restaurant?
Chez Bruce in Wandsworth is my favourite restaurant. It's got incredible wine list, and also the menu's just full of things you want to eat, and the chef is top notch.
Your favorite London wine bar? That's not Noble Rot.
There's one in Haggerston called Plonk, and Jonathan, who's the owner, has put together a great cellar. It's full of regional wines from France and Italy and Spain and Switzerland and Alpine wines and all sorts of stuff. So that's my favourite.
I really enjoyed Plonk as well the last time I was in London.
Mm.
Your go-to holiday party, like festive wine?
Well, on holiday in Italy this year, I drank a lot of Emidio Pepe Serrasuelo d'Abruzzo, which is made from Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, but it's kind of made in a style more like a white wine. So, they take it off the skins quite quickly after being foot crushed. So it's more like an intense, energetic, light rosé. I love that slightly chilled.
And when you say holiday, you mean like summer vacation holiday, right?
Summer vacation, yeah,
Okay, I meant
absolutely.
I meant winter, but I understood that you meant summer.
Okay.
So I guess I'll ask your go-to winter like dinner party wine.
Oh, I don't know if varies that much between winter and summer. I like the wines I like, and one white wine that I like is Suerte del Marqués Trenzado, which is one of my favorite Spanish white wines. It's made from Listan Blanco, which is Palomino in sherry. But unlike in sherry, it's kind of quite smoky and more mouth-watering from Tenerife, where the wine is made. So I love those wines grown on volcanic soils.
Now closed restaurant that you wish you could kind of magically bring back from the dead.
Well, I used to go with my wife together. We used to go to Cafe Anglais, which was a restaurant by Rowley Lee. And Rowley Lee, along with Simon Hopkinson and Alistair Little, was one of these chefs that kind of, well, they coined the term modern British, I think, for the kind of style of cooking they did. And we used to love this restaurant because it was Art Deco. It was bizarrely in a shopping centre in Bayswater, like above a McDonald's or something. But it was a beautiful restaurant. And what I loved about Rowley's cooking is he'd have like pike quenelles on the menu, and then next to it it'd have like hamburger and chips. So it was very diverse, but he's a great cook. So I wish I could go back to Cafe Anglais.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, finally, a fictional food scene, like in a book or a movie, that you wish you could somehow eat in real life.
One of my favorite films with my kids is Ratatouille. So I think it would have to be that meal towards the end where the the critic comes in and the rat cooks him that meal that blows him away.
The
So I'd love
Ratatouille.
to, yeah. So I'd love to come and be part of that film. And it's based on La Tour d'Argent as well. Ratatouille, and La Tour d'Argent is somewhere I try to go every year because it's just got the best wine cellar in the world at good prices. So, and it's got a beautiful view as well.
Well, I never knew that that's the restaurant it was based on. So I'll have to scheme my way there as well. And thanks again for coming on the show, Dan. This has been so fun.
And to end the show, Alana Yazzie talks about her amazing new book, The Modern Navajo Kitchen.
Hi there, it's Alana Yazzie from the Fancy Navajo. I'm a lifestyle and food blogger based in Phoenix, Arizona. I recently released The Modern Navajo Kitchen, homestyle recipes that celebrate the flavors and traditions of the Dene. I wrote this cookbook because there aren't many modern Navajo or indigenous cookbooks, and some of my favorite things to make from the book are for braised red chili mutton stew, which pairs so well with blue corn flour tortillas, and you can end the meal with blue corn cupcakes. I just love these recipes because they're a good introduction to Navajo, indigenous, and southwestern flavors. You can purchase the book wherever books are sold. However, go out and support your local bookstores. My favorite is Palabras Bookstores, which is located here in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is Taste is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Eliza Abarbanel. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things happening.